Welcome back to Crime Scene X. Today's video will cover 3 creepy and true movie theater horror stories. If you enjoy the video, please comment down below, like the video, and hit that subscribe button for daily uploads. It was just another Thursday night at the Harkins Theater, and I was clocking in for the evening shift. The lobby was filled with the usual clatter of people lining up for tickets, chattering about the latest blockbusters. But tonight I could feel something different in the air, something that gave me anxiety in my stomach. Being one of the senior staff members, I was responsible for handling ticket sales, overseeing the concession stand, and occasionally popping upstairs to the projection room. Mr. Chambers, the aging manager of my theater, had once again trusted me to close the place down. "Michael," he said, handing me the keys, "I'm counting on you tonight. You know the drill." I assured him that everything would go smoothly, and with a nod he left, leaving me and a couple of younger staff members to manage the evening crowd. The first few hours went by without a hitch. The new suspense thriller was pulling in the crowds, and the theater was buzzing with excitement. I had always loved the atmosphere of a busy cinema, the communal experience of watching a movie in a packed theater. Then, as the last moviegoers settled into their seats, and the lobby began to quiet down, a man entered through the front doors. He was tall and had sharp features and eyes that seemed to dart everywhere at once. His coat was dirty looking, and his shoes were scuffed and worn. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. He approached the ticket counter with an unsettling grin, his eyes fixed on mine. "One for the late show," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper. I handed him his ticket, our fingers briefly touching. His hand was ice cold. I hurriedly went about my duties, but I couldn't shake the image of his piercing eyes from my mind. Hours wore on, and as the theater began to empty, I was left with a growing sense of dread. There was something about that man that didn't sit right with me. At last, the final credits rolled, and I began my closing duties. I was alone, save for the janitor, Thomas, who was busy cleaning the restrooms. I made my way to the projection room to shut everything down, my mind still on the strange man. The winding corridor seemed longer than usual, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. When I reached the projector room, I noticed something odd. The door was ajar. My heart skipped a beat. That door was always locked. I entered cautiously, my hands trembling. Everything seemed in order, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I saw it. A scrap of that dirty coat caught in the door, the same coat that the strange man had been wearing. Panic set in. Was he still in the theater? What did he want? I raced back downstairs, my mind racing. I needed to find Thomas and get out of there. As I reached the lobby, I saw the strange man standing by the concession stand, his back to me, rummaging through the cash register. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice breaking. He turned, his eyes wild, a crazed look on his face. "You shouldn't be here!" he screamed, lunging at me with a knife. I dodged, my heart pounding in my chest, and sprinted towards the office, praying that I could reach the phone and call for help. I could hear him behind me. I reached the office and slammed the door shut, locking it just as he crashed against it. I dialed 911, my hands shaking, and begged them to hurry. Outside, the man was pounding on the door, screaming incoherent threats. I could hear the wood starting to splinter, and I knew it wouldn't hold for long. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the man's voice growing more and more unhinged. Then finally, I heard the sirens, and the pounding stopped. The police arrived and arrested the man. It turns out he was a wanted criminal, hiding out in the theater after a robbery gone wrong. I was hailed as a hero, but I didn't feel like one. I couldn't shake the terror of that night, the feeling of being hunted like prey. My name is Lila, and I've always been passionate about movies, the kind that make you feel, think, and sometimes even shake in terror. That's why when I heard about the midnight showings at the historic Castellan Theater, I couldn't resist. The Castellan was a relic, nestled in a more obscure part of town. It still had its marquee from the 50s, bright with neon lights. There was a certain charm to the velvet seats and old-fashioned popcorn machines, an atmosphere you couldn't find in modern theaters. It was like stepping into another era. One night, my best friend Aaron and I decided to attend a midnight showing. The movie, an old thriller that neither of us had heard of, but we were drawn by the allure of the experience. As we approached, I noticed the entrance was dim. The only light came from the marquee in the ticket booth, where a middle-aged man named Mr. Barrett sat. He was known to everyone as the caretaker of the Castellan. "2 for the midnight showing," Erin chirped, handing over her money. Mr. Barrett's deep-set eyes observed us for a moment before he nodded, handing us 2 worn-out tickets. "Enjoy," he murmured, his voice hoarse as though he hadn't spoken in years. Inside, the theater was almost empty. It was just us, a young couple seated a few rows ahead, and an elderly man in a trench coat perched right at the back. His hat was low, covering most of his face. Erin and I took seats in the middle, the optimal spot for sound and picture. We shared a tub of popcorn, laughing and whispering as the lights dimmed. The film began. It was a black and white thriller. A woman named Clara was being stalked by a mysterious man throughout a city. As the plot thickened, Erin whispered, "The protagonist looks eerily like you, Lila." I laughed it off, but I had to admit there was a resemblance. During a particularly intense scene, when Clara was cornered in an alleyway, the film suddenly jammed, the screen blanketed in white static. The soft ambient sound of the theater filled the void, the faint whisper of the couple ahead, the rustling of the elderly man in the back, and then, a new sound. Footsteps. Not from the movie, from behind us. The steps grew louder, echoing in the theater. We turned to see the elderly man slowly making his way down the aisle. As he got closer, I could see his eyes, milky white and unblinking. "Probably just heading to the restroom," Erin whispered, though I could hear the tension in her voice. But he didn't move towards the exit. Instead, he took a seat directly behind us. My heart raced. Every hair on my neck stood on end. The movie restarted, but my focus was entirely on the man. When I gathered the courage to glance back, I found him staring straight at me, his gaze piercing. I quickly turned to Erin. "Let's move seats." Without a word, we grabbed our stuff and shifted a few rows down. But when I looked back again, the man was still watching us. "What does he want?" Erin whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe he's just lonely," I reasoned, although I didn't believe my words. The film continued, but it became background noise. The man's presence consumed our attention. He would occasionally get up, change seats, but always stayed close to us. And he never took his eyes off me. At one point, Erin suggested we leave, but I didn't want to appear paranoid. After all, it was just an old man in a theater, right? Maybe he was a regular, someone who found solace in late-night films. The climax of the film approached, and I tried to immerse myself in it. Clara, the protagonist, was on a subway, and her stalker was close behind. My heart raced in tandem with the film's suspense. And then, the lights in the theater went out. It was pitch black. Erin grabbed my hand, her grip cold and tight. All we could hear was our breathing and the faint, continuous hum of the projector. Moments later, the emergency lights illuminated the exit signs. I glanced around and noticed that the man was no longer in his seat. Panic surged through me. "Erin, we need to get out. Now." We began to move, trying our best to stay quiet. But as we reached the aisle, a figure emerged from the shadows. The man stood there, blocking our way, his milky eyes fixed on me. Without thinking, I pushed past him, pulling Erin with me. We ran for the exit, bursting out into the cold night. I dared to look back and saw the man standing in the doorway, still as a statue. Breathing heavily, we hurried to Erin's car parked a block away. As we drove off, I tried to make sense of the night. "Do you think he followed us from somewhere?" Erin asked, glancing at the rearview mirror nervously. "I don't know, but we're not going back there." Days turned into weeks, and the fear began to subside. The incident at the Castellan became a story we shared at gatherings, although with each retelling, the fear became more palpable. It was supposed to be just another night working at the movie theater, but that night was different. A special late-night screening had been arranged. A private booking for an indie film director named Leonard Ashcroft. He'd rented out the entire theater to screen his latest creation for a select audience. I'd been asked to stay late and manage the show. The crowd was different from our usual patrons. These were die-hard cinephiles, dressed in high fashion, murmuring about film theories and camera angles. Leonard himself was a charismatic man, tall and sharply dressed, with piercing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. As the lights dimmed and the film began to play, I settled into my chair in the back of the theater. I glanced at the projection booth, where Derek, the projectionist, was meticulously handling the old 35mm film projector. About halfway through the movie, something strange happened. The film began to stutter and jerk. Derek seemed to be struggling with the projector. The audience grew restless, and Leonard himself stood up and demanded to know what was happening. "I'll go check," I said, heading towards the projection room. When I entered the booth, I found Derek slumped over the projector, his hands covered in blood. His throat had been slashed. I screamed and stumbled back, the realization hitting me like a freight train. Someone had killed Derek. I ran back into the theater, my heart pounding, my mind racing. Leonard and the others were demanding answers, but all I could do was point towards the projection room. Panic erupted. People began to scramble for the exits. The police were called, and everyone was questioned. As the investigation unfolded, it was discovered that a mentally unstable man who had once worked at the theater was responsible. He'd been obsessed with the old films and had snuck in that night. Derek's death had been a tragic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The horror of that night will never leave me. The screams, the fear, the reality of a senseless killing, they are all etched into my memory. Thanks for watching.